Assassin's Creed 1, or simply Assassin's Creed, was released in 2007 to a lukewarm response. Much of the game's criticism was levied at its repetitive mission structure. These issues would be mostly resolved as later games would add additional elements to the gameplay loop for the better in most areas. By comparison to the more action-oriented modern releases, the first game seems rather bare bones and lacking in depth of content. However, the first game excels in one particular area that not even the beloved Ezio trilogy has been able to top, in my view, and that is the moral ambiguity between the Assassins and the Templars. The moral ambiguity between these two factions has not been repeated since the first game. Assassin's Creed, or Assassin's Creed 1 for the purposes of clarification, excels at depicting most of the assigned assassination targets as morally gray individuals rather than mustache-twirling villains that would occur in later entries in the series. Essentially, both groups are depicted as opposing sides of the same coin, looking to achieve peace among people, albeit by different means. The main character, Altair, even comes to this conclusion after assassinating several targets and hearing their dying confessions. These confessions all add up to the notion that Assassins and Templars are not as different as Altair and the player had originally been told. The creed of the Assassins follows three explicit tenets that its members must follow. These three tenets are that members must not harm innocents, must hide in plain sight, and never compromise the creed. The Assassins held the belief that the removal of corrupt political figures would benefit the many, particularly the less fortunate of society. The creed operates in secrecy, hence the need to hide in plain sight and never compromise the Brotherhood. The Assassins work towards wisdom rather than freedom, as stated by their maxim, "Nothing is true, everything is permitted." In short, if the Assassins could remove or weed out corruption through these acts, the lives of the common man could be made better, and government/ruling bodies could be composed of just individuals with the people's needs and their best interest. The Templar Order set out to establish peace through the civilized world. Their beliefs say that the common man is in need of guidance and structure, believing man to have a natural depravity and barbaric tendencies that needed systems such as education and security to establish order and proper foundational guidance. Much like the Assassins, they would pursue their needs no matter the cost. Their adoption of a more realist view of the world led them to prioritize control and structure among men above all else to establish peace. Conflict could not be solved through agency in their view, but rather through minimizing it as much as possible. Unlike their adversaries, the world did not contain universal truths in their view, or at least their self-imposed truths. While both orders contain their faults and reasonable arguments, the first game does the best job of establishing these ideals. While most games have been consistent with the ideas of the Creed, with modifications here and there, the Templars have generally been painted as the one-note bad guys in follow-up games. Most of the Templar targets in AC1 are sympathetic, relatable, and even justified to some extent. The same can't be said for the game's later Templars, such as the Borgia family. And just as a disclaimer, if I happen to mispronounce any of these names, I do apologize. Starting off with Tamir, he is by no means a spitting image of a good person. He is an arms dealer who was smuggling weapons to aid the armies of the Holy War. He was known to have tantrums and kill others who disobeyed, much like what we saw before Altair's assassination of him. During his confession, Tamir calls Altair a petty death dealer, signaling that on some level the Assassins are no better than Templars, as death surrounds both orders. While Tamir is not a sympathetic character by any means compared to some of the other assassination targets, he does hint at the idea that the Assassins are not an innocent party in the grand scheme of things. This only further fleshed out by later assassination targets. Gagne de Neplaus is much like Tamir in that his actions are cruel towards his patients. The patients are often suffering mental issues or other circumstances outside of their control. Gagne takes them in and essentially influences them to be more docile. To him, he is saving the patients from a worse fate, as he shares in his confessions. He also uses the child playing with fire analogy to show how giving people complete freedom, as what the assassins believe, may not be completely morally good action or belief either. Gagne's work did save some people from a worse fate despite them being subject to him and his order. This is an extreme form of brainwashing, but could the Assassin Brotherhood be doing similar things as well? Next, Talal works similarly to Gagne in the hopes of saving people, this time through making them slaves. He claims that he is giving them a better life than one begging or being an addict during Altair's encounter with him. Altair begins to notice that these targets have just causes, albeit questionable means, fulfilling those causes. In this case of Talal, he was not profiting from the slaves, but rather trying to help them in his own way from a worse fate. Abul Nuqawd did not support the war, considering it was in the name of a god that would consider him an affront to those practices of the religion. His lavish lifestyle and large physical form would be seen as unholy. He was vehemently against the war and sought to join the Templars in the hopes of shaping a better order. Religion can offer great comfort and purpose to many people, but it also alienates some groups, much like Nuqawd. As a result, he would reject the war and then seek vengeance on the populace that ridiculed him. In addition, while not explicitly stated, it is possible he is also homosexual, which of course would deem him as unholy in the eyes of those that practice religion in Jerusalem. His acts would see many citizens murdered in an effort to combat the beliefs of the religion and motivations of the war. Again, here we see initially righteous belief, just with cruel actions to meet those beliefs. William of Montferrat offers some insight into how the assassin's cause has many unanswered questions. During his confession, he notes that the assassins do not set the cities free, but actually damn them, and that no good intentions come from these acts. To some extent, toppling the established leadership can lead to chaos among citizens, since there would be a power vacuum. Others might also turn on one another to seize that power as well. Essentially, he is stating that these assassinations do little to save the people in the long run. He also noted how his district had no crime, and his conscription was trained more so in the ways of discipline rather than combat. The resources were not stolen from the citizens, but rather stockpiled in order to use in times of great need. He also did not plan on killing King Richard, but rather believed that Acre belonged to the people and no single ruler. Much like assassins, William sought to restore power to individual citizens rather than to simply one monarch or a small ruling body. Majid-Din is an outlier within the frame of looking at the moral ambiguity between assassins and Templars. He essentially likes killing people because it made him feel like a god. There really isn't too much more to his character, and that he simply used the Templar order to fill out his desires for fear among people to gain a sense of power. He was manipulating the citizens in order to believe that his regular executions were justified. He also claimed that Altair would have done the same if he were put in the same position, asserting the notion that no one is resistant to the power if given the opportunity to wield or gain it. Sibrand is this paranoid leader of the Teutonic Order that would oversee the port district of Acre, where he also met his end by Altair. He states that he upheld his cause and was following orders no different than Altair would have. Sibrand represents a loyal follower who has his own beliefs, much like the assassins of the Brotherhood. Altair follows the orders of Al-Mualim without question, much like Sibrand does for the Templars. These two mirror one another in their loyalty and service to their respective orders. Jubair al-Hakim is in the process of burning books when Altair is set to take him down. He believed that knowledge and learning prevented people from being convinced of other beliefs, making them stuck in their ways. This would prevent them from seeing their true purpose according to his views and the Templar orders. Jubair also mentions this same notion during his confession when he tells Altair that he is too quick to strike him down without seeing his point of view. Once again, this statement calls into question of the blind obedience Altair has towards his order, and showing that the Templars may be simply the other side of the same coin. Robert de Sable convinced Richard to ally himself with Saladin in order to wipe out the assassins since they had killed leaders on both sides. Robert was initially the final target for Altair and proved to be the most challenging up to this point. Robert wanted the Order to have the Apple of Eden, while the true leader, Al-Mualim, wanted it for himself. While Robert was not presented as a morally gray or justified character, he did highlight Altair's lingering suspicions about the purpose of his hunt for the Nine and that his own master was the leader of the organization they swore to destroy. Lastly, Al-Mualim represents the folly of Altair's obedience towards the Creed, and by extension his own master. Altair's defeat of his master would only perpetuate the conflict we see today further by highlighting that these two orders are doomed to struggle with one another. If not for Altair's actions, perhaps there would have actually been some kind of resolved issue between these two organizations. Essentially what Altair does, and by extension the player in their actions, is continue the cycle of never-ending conflict. His own master was a Templar, meaning that essentially he could play both sides of the chessboard. Al-Mualim represents the corruption that comes with the power of holding the Apple of Eden, but also how the organizations of the Assassins and Templars are not so different from one another in this first entry of the Assassin's Creed series. While later games would go on to paint the Templars as the clear bad guys, Assassin's Creed 1 makes the most successful attempt to paint both orders of having their shared flaws and commonalities. While they could have gone much further with this concept in the original game and later entries in the series, it would not be reiterated again to anywhere near this extent as shown in these 10 assassination targets. Thanks for taking the time to check out the video. In your view, are the Templars justified in some aspects of their actions? Can we really possess free will? Are we in need of order and guidance after all? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.